Before we start this commentary, I want to say I have not watched the Teen Wolf movie and I will not be watching it. This commentary is only based on the Teen Wolf TV show. This is going to be a controversial one, but hear me out. Stydia wasn't a great ship. Stydia is a very popular ship in the show Teen Wolf. The characters Lydia Martin and Stiles were a fan favourite to end up together, and throughout the show they have a relationship that drags out over the years. And I'm here to argue that it wasn't done well at all. Originally, when I watched the show when I was like 15 or 16, I was a huge fan of Stydia. I loved the idea of a man that yearned, and I still do. But rewatching this show in my 20s showed me that this isn't actually what Stydia was. They actually have quite a strange evolution with their relationship that I would argue feels more forced than natural, and in this video we are going to go over this. The idea versus the reality. I think the idea of Stydia was really promising, but the reality of it didn't match up. It kind of reminds me of how, as someone who writes stories and novels, your characters sometimes go on their own journey and you quickly realise they may have outgrown your ideas for them. I think Stydia is a strong case of this. There was always a lot of anticipation leading towards Stiles and Lydia, as they did build them up in the first couple of seasons, and this is truly the reason I believe the writers held on to Stydia. It feels like they put themselves into a box and couldn't remember how to find a way out of it. There was a very short moment where they almost remembered they were trapping themselves in a creation of their own and that there was a solid way out. But then they put those paper handcuffs back on and carried on chasing Stydia. The writers were quite aware that audiences loved a good yearning storyline, especially when it carries across multiple seasons and has a good payoff that feels earned. Think of one of my favourite examples, Luke and Lorelai from Gilmore Girls. Yes, Luke yearned for Lorelai in a subtle, broody way, but this feeling was reciprocated by Lorelai. No, she wasn't as obvious about it, and sometimes you would question how she felt, but deep down you knew if Luke shared how he felt, Lorelai would be ready to take that leap. She made continuous actions throughout the show that really displayed her interest in Luke. But Lydia, her interactions between her and Stiles versus her and Scott weren't really all that different. Nothing that showed a constant thread of attraction between her and Stiles. And I think that's a massive problem. I don't know if this is down to the writing or acting or neither, but I truly don't think the execution of the ship was done well. This is where the show falls flat. They focus too much on the idea of Stydia rather than actually developing and building it. It got to a point where it just felt like fan service. It is so telling to rewatch this show now, as an adult rather than a teenager, and see how Lydia really showed such a lack of interest in Stiles compared to how we pined for her. And as an adult, I can see how unfair this dynamic is. I understand no one forced this on Stiles, and that's not really what I'm complaining about. I actually think forcing Lydia into this ship also does a disservice to her character. This brings me to Lydia's character journey. Her character arc focused more on her powers and her independence, and how her intelligence was a strong driving force for most of this show. At times, many times, her ability to solve every problem of theirs almost became like a party trick. It did get a bit silly, because you always knew there was no real stakes, because Lydia would have her aha moment and figure everything out for them. Anyways though, this isn't the point I was trying to make. Lydia has quite a confusing arc, because originally you can see they were going for a really stereotypical mean/popular girl angle, where she didn't even feel like a real person but a caricature. It's kind of sad how little depth her character was granted in the early days. She was definitely a victim of the rampant misogyny presented in Hollywood in the early 2010s, where women were boxed into such cliche roles. Then in season 2 you can see they start to humanise Lydia a little bit. She shows more depth. She still has the facade of being a ditzy teen girl, but there are some cracks to show us she isn't just sexual innuendos and intense mean girl stares. I want to note as well at this point, she still brushes Stiles aside and doesn't really see him as a romantic interest. We do see her confide in him, and we do see her coming to him as a safe space, but, and I stress but, this season shows us how she still does not view him as a romantic interest. She still views him as this kind of somewhat annoying nerdy guy who is nice enough to her but not really her type. Finally, in season 3, she actually becomes a real person. We see the multiple layers to Lydia. She suffers with kind of being neglected by her parents due to the fact that they take it for granted she is so smart and can take care of herself. This could possibly explain away her really fake persona in the first 2 seasons. Stiles and her do spend more time together in this season. There is definitely a lot more screen time shared between the two, but still nothing intense. Honestly, at this point in the show, it feels like Stiles has kind of moved on and views her as a friend more. Back to Lydia though. She is also a very resilient and independent character. Even though they have her in relationships every season, she is the kind of character that you know she knows she doesn't actually need a man. They are more of an accessory for her, which was kind of rare to see back in the day. And I did love this for her. Like, yes, she can have these men wrapped around her finger, but at the end of the day, she is smarter than all of them and is probably going to go further in life. I do also think her friendship with Allison was great. I think they had a really good, believable chemistry together as friends. That's definitely something I enjoyed watching as it played out over the seasons. With season 4, I don't remember too much about her character growth. I obviously know she has to deal with the aftermath of Allison's death, and we sort of see her grow as a character, but not entirely. Like, it feels as if season 4 is almost where they forgot to continue to develop Lydia and she just stays stagnant. They also have the beginning of her weird kind of relationship with Parrish. Very odd of them, but anyways. Then in season 5, she really goes through it as a character. Truly not a nice storyline for her, as all she goes through is trauma. But because of this, because she is barely present in the season with the other characters, her growth is somewhat stunted amongst the group. So I do believe this does a disservice to her yet again, because this leads them into rushing Stydia in season 6. So we go from a season of Lydia being practically absent, showing no growth between her and Stiles romantically, to season 6 with Stiles vanishing, being absent from the show, a quick out of place I love you from him, and then Lydia suddenly realising she loves him. It was absurd and poorly done, and I'm sorry if you disagree, but it's true. Even if they did have all the chemistry in the world, and even if they were a great ship, the execution of them in season 6 was poorly done and out of place. This leads me on to the point that I'd like to make that Stiles liked the idea of Lydia. When we first see the dynamic between the two, Stiles doesn't know Lydia. Not personally. He just likes the idea of her, and it cannot be denied that he has a deep fascination with her. A good way to make this an understandable scenario if you yourself haven't pined for someone you know in real life. Think of you crushing on a celebrity when you were younger, feeling as if you knew them, but then realising you don't actually know them at all. Ross Lynch. That's what Stydia is and was. Stiles was so into who he thought Lydia to be, but I feel like once he got to know her, their dynamic changed and he stopped pining for her because she became his friend. And arguably, that bond was so much more stronger between them and it felt way more natural. This is when I ask, does the show actually do a good enough job of transitioning his idealization of Lydia into true mature love, or do they just rely on the audience to remember his long-term crush on her from season 1 in order for this relationship to work? I would argue it's the latter. Their relationship really isn't developed enough. The writers really wanted to rely on us remembering Stiles' yearning for Lydia in season 1 and 2 for them to work. For instance, when I rewatched this show, I really noticed how Stiles and Lydia are kind of forgotten about in seasons 3 and 4, and during these seasons, Stydia isn't even an afterthought. Sure, they have some shared moments together, but these moments feel more like the growth of their friendship as it naturally would be in a friend group. I would have needed to see more yearning, like subtle yearning from Stiles throughout all the seasons for me to be convinced of Stydia in my 20s. I would need the kind of yearning we saw from Luke towards Lorelai in Gilmore Girls. That felt like the true thought-out payoff, not just pandering to what your fans want, knowing it will be an easy win for the majority of the fan base. Because Stiles really kind of stops yearning for Lydia after season 2. But I would also need this yearning from Lydia too, like so much more. She would need to have stepped up big time, because I barely felt any sign of interest from her throughout the seasons. We see Stiles develop outside of his feelings for Lydia. We see him explore other avenues, like trying to lose his V card to his childhood friend in season 3, and then of course, he meets Malia. Stiles and Malia, who I think should have been endgame. I know this is so controversial. I know I'm walking into a big fat line of swords right now as I say this, because I also feel like I'm completely betraying 15-year-old me, okay? I understand, but I can't deny my feelings when rewatching this show at 25 years old with a fully developed frontal lobe. Hear me out. We see this relationship follow a proper development. Sure, you could argue it's a little rushed, especially at the beginning, but I think the development of the relationship is so much more natural and they were a much better fit. Part of me feels like these two were pulled apart by the writers due to the backlash from fans when Malia got paired with Stiles. And I can't lie, I never sent anyone hate, but when I was 15 watching this show, I did feel betrayed by Stiles being with Malia and not Lydia. Like, yeah, I did. I get it. But I see everything clearly now. The rose-coloured glasses are off. I found it really wholesome to watch these two paired together rewatch because you could see how Stiles accepted Malia on her journey to being reintegrated into a human world. He accepted her the way she was and was a positive influence on her life, helping her regain her footing, literally. Then with Malia, we see how she understood his anxieties and some of his struggles he had been through. We also saw how she was also a positive influence in his life, pushing him to think further and challenging him at times. A healthy balance. I again really feel like the backlash of these two was the reason the writers panicked and brought Stydia back to the forefront for season 6, because the whole scene between Malia and Stiles where he realises that Malia uses the same colour coordination as him. In my eyes, that was the perfect setup to say they were a match made in heaven, was it not? That scene alone showed how Stalia were literally a perfect fit. They understood each other on a whole other level. It literally made them seem like soulmates. This scene, on its own, was way better than any of Stydia. Sorry, not sorry, I said what I said. Be mad. This level of understanding is so romantic, so perfect pairing, argue with the wall if you disagree. Also, you may not want to hear it, but I even believe the chemistry between these two was so much stronger than that between Lydia and Stiles. Whenever those two were paired together, especially season 5 onwards, it felt forced. It felt like they knew they were being pushed to end up together. However, Malia and Stiles, they felt like they were growing together, that they were maturing together and gaining a deeper understanding of each other. Their breakup, which kind of just happened off screen where they slowly stopped interacting with each other, felt rushed and forced. The reason for the breakup didn't even make sense. It all boiled down to a lack of communication or want for communication, but up until this point their communication between each other had been pretty strong. Stiles literally helped Malia regain her human side. He was able to understand her when no one else could. So when the writers tried to tell me that these two actually can't communicate and don't want to, it made no sense. There was no good reason for their breakup except for the fact that fans made it known how much they disliked the pairing despite them actually making sense. Even if the writers had planned for Stydia to be endgame, they did it so awfully because after Stiles and Malia's breakup, they still take another whole season to reintroduce Stydia and start focusing on them. Stiles and Malia felt like an actual relationship, while Stiles and Lydia felt like an idea the show returned to at the end. I wholeheartedly believe Stydia should have remained platonic. By the time we get to season 6, I feel as if Stydia made more sense as a platonic dynamic. Their bond is still extremely meaningful, just not in a romantic way. For instance, I think they worked really well at being intellectual equals. They were able to bounce ideas off of each other and get into the nitty-gritty details of certain mysteries they needed to unravel. They were able to understand each other's intellectual language whilst the others couldn't. This is where their bond thrived. Additionally, at this point, Stiles and Lydia both felt as if they had gone their separate ways and moved on from trying to be in a relationship. And it worked well. It made more sense as Lydia had never shown true interest in Stiles as a romantic partner. Sure, there had been fleeting moments here and there, but nothing that felt concrete. The kiss scene between Lydia and Stiles in season 3 again feels like a forced moment more than a development of their relationship. Does it work? Yes. Does it entirely change the nature of their relationship and dynamic? No. This kiss isn't really brought up ever again except for maybe in season 6 when they remember they want Stydia to be endgame, but this moment was truly an example of fan service looking back. This moment doesn't further the plot or change the dynamic between the two. Arguably, I would say the sense of yearning never felt reciprocated from Lydia's side, not until the writers remembered they needed them to end up together in season 6. And at this point, it feels like it's too far gone. That if Lydia really wanted to be with Stiles, I would have liked to have seen her yearn earlier on, rather than it feeling like an afterthought to her after all of her other options are extinct. Stydia simply didn't have enough of a consistent build-up. They were forgotten about for like 3 seasons. Both of their characters' emotional and romantic progression wasn't leading them to each other. Overall, I believe forcing Stydia to end up together did both characters such a disservice. By the end of the show, they didn't make sense together, especially since they were both off doing their separate things. There was also almost no point in them ending up together apart from fan service, because Dylan O'Brien was barely in season 6. So the fans get them, but at the cost that you don't actually really see them together again. Anyway, this was just something that had been on my mind whilst I was rewatching Teen Wolf with my boyfriend over the past couple months. I used to be the biggest Stydia fan. I had definitely over-glamorized and romanticized their dynamic in my mind because I was really surprised to rewatch the show and actually be disappointed as I watched their relationship unravel with a payoff that didn't feel earned. Let me know what you thought about Stydia. Do you still love them? Do you still think they were great together? Or did you prefer these characters with other romantic interests that they had? Let me know. I look forward to seeing other people's opinions.